Hi, guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Heavy Metal Tones of me, your podcast host, Tony Evans. Yes, it's the first of 2026. Would you believe it? The first episode of a new year. And I thought I would start the year with something that probably a lot of you, and I'm going to say over half, and that's being probably presumptuous of me, of a band and an album that you have never heard of. I had heard this album and of this band many years ago, but it was sort of then lost into the ether and in your mind and all that stuff. And I was just sort of listening to it again for the first time. Gosh, maybe just before Christmas, and I thought, hey, this would be a good episode for the first one of the year. So this is a unique album, a unique band, and a unique time in history. This is one of those bands where not a lot of it is actually known. There's bits and pieces. I'm going off what I can find on the internet. It's not a lot of history around the band itself, like i.e., you know, the people in the band and their histories. Is just sort of rough, noted together information. This band is called Black Death from America. They are the very first, and this is again, this could be disputed, but most people say they're the very first all African American heavy metal band. They formed in 1977 in Ohio and Cleveland, USA, and they were active between 1977 and 1984, and then there was a big hiatus, and now there's 2009 to present, but the 2009 to present is a little bit dubious. The 77 though to 84 is the period that we're going to talk about. They are considered by Ian Christie's amazing book Sound of the Beast, The Complete Headbanging History of Heavy Metal and Rock and Roll, as the first and only all-black American band in the country. This was in 1987, of course, when the book was written. Things have changed since then. So, as I said, formed by guitarist Greg Hicks, drummer Phil Bullard, and bassist Claiborne Pinkins. As an unnamed group, they persisted for a year without a vocalist. So they were sort of like, I think they were very much like a punk band. 77 is, you would have been around that sort of time when punk was cut very much in, even in the States. And who walks into the door but a brilliantly named singer and guitarist called Siki Spacek, which is a wonderful play on Sissy Spacek. You know, typical punk thing to do, typical early metal thing to do, right? Uh, he actually changed his name by default to stay that way now, so that is his official name, which I find I love that. I really really love that. He has one of those really interestingly 50s American name for me. His original name is Reginald Gamble. I love that. Reggie Gamble. Now Siki Spacek. That's Siki Spacek is spelled Siki, and Spacek Spacek. All right. Love it. Absolutely fantastic. So he joins the band and fulfills the role as guitarist for the band alongside Hicks. The band would not have an official name until nearly 2 years after its creation. Hicks and Pinkins eventually decided on Black Death. Shortly thereafter, Pinkins sadly was shot and killed. Now, this is before they recorded their first demo. I don't actually. There's no I searched for the story behind the shooting. I don't know. And I'm not going to make an assumption that it was the 70s and he was of an African American affiliation, status, and so maybe he was. Who knows? I don't know. I don't want to go there. I'm not going to go there. But sadly, he did get shot and killed before the band could record. And the resulting lineup changes consisted of two new bassists, the latter of which, Darryl Harris, would become the final member of the classic lineup held on the band's debut album. So, they found someone, but that would have been a real tough one because, you know, Claiborne had been there on bass for quite some time. Again, another great name. Claiborne's a great name. Claiborne Pinkins sounds like a real bass, like a real blues guitarist, doesn't it? Fantastic. At the end of the band's first major hiatus, though, which the band lasted from 1988 to 2009, the lineup took another significant turn, with the band was officially reformed as Mandrake. And that's as far as I'm going to go with it. I'm not going to go into other things, all the different information. That's basically what happened. So they formed as Black Death from 77 to 84. They lost their bass player, shot unfortunately, and killed. Sicky Spacek joins on guitar. I think he does a little bit of vocals as well. Amazing, right? This is the core of this album and this sound, right? Sorry, yeah, Sicky Spacek did all of the vocals. I know there was some of the bands did a little bit of backing vocals, but Sicky Spacek, it's guitar and vocals. But so the band itself, it consisted of Sicky Spacek on vocals, guitar. You have Phil Bullard on drums, also passed away in 2008. So that's very sad. Clay Pinkins on bass from 77 to 79. Again, he died, as we mentioned, shot before the first demo. Daryl Harris on bass from 1980 to 1985. And then we have a little change of Stanley Gore on drums from 86 to 88. Joe Harris on bass from 87 to 88. And then once Sicky Spacek left, Vincent Lindsay on guitars. He also passed away in 2018. So it's a real sort of tragic story of this band. But the album that they leave us with is quite a fascinating sort of tick in the box of history of music, really, because you have to think about the time of which this band was performing. So 77, in America, it was your funk, it was soul, there was blues, there was punk, there was rock and roll, there was white middle America, there was AOR, there was there was a lot of places that were all heavily white dominated, outside of, say, soul and blues, but it was still very heavily white dominated in the music scene. And so for a band of African American heritage to go and form a band with music that was all, at that time, so like as I said, when this album came out in 84, really, really dominated by the big bands, all of them very much, Caucasian, if you like to say. So, and of course, at the same time, 84 rap was sort of moving into the mainstream as well. So, punk in America, in the underground, particularly in New York, had moved from the punk. It was moving from punk to rap. A good example of that is the Beastie Boys. They're originally a extreme metal band that loved Venom and bands like that. Then moved into, out of the punk scene into the rap, into the hip hop scene, and look where they are, what they become. So they're the opposite, aren't they? They're like the white band that dominated a mainly African American scene. So it just begs to show that when you do listen to this album, what do you get? Do you get hints of their heritage? Do you get a different take on the sound that was being produced in the UK? Because this is very heavily new wave of British heavy metal dominated in its sound and their look. And sadly to say, no, you don't. You don't. If you're looking for something, a time in life an album where it's going to blend Americana, African American music and heritage with a burgeoning UK metal scene sound, you're not getting that. You're not getting that. That is something that may come in a more experimental side somewhere else. But this particular album was their take on it. It's their version of a new wave of British heavy metal album. There is not a inkling of American connect. In my opinion, there's not an inkling of American influence on this album. I cannot hear. Maybe Dio if I'm really trying to dig into it. It's mainly Maiden, Priest, Saxon. There's a lot of Diamond Head in there. I can hear. There's a lot of that things like Cloven Hoof, Venom, in some respects, Demon, Satan, all those kind of bands that were coming out. Tigers of Pangtang, definitely, that were coming out of the UK at that time. Now, this album was released in '84, right on sort of the end of the new wave of British heavy metal, but it was the band were formed and were recording during its main peak. So, the year of '84 was when bands like Iron Maiden were on their Power Slave tour. So their sound had dramatically changed from Killers and from Iron Maiden. It really moved on in a major way because they now had Bruce Dickinson, who was now into the third album with them, and was had a much more greater vocal range, and so forth. The band could spread its wings. Here with Black Death, it's self-titled only album, you get more of Diano. In fact, it's almost, when you listen to this album, it's almost Maiden by numbers. It's almost new wave British heavy metal by numbers. It feels very much like a band from a different country, and it doesn't sound American. So when you put it on, for the first time you hear it, you wouldn't really know, to be honest. You'd be hard pressed to work out this wasn't a one-off new wave British heavy metal album that people hadn't heard. You wouldn't know it was from America. So when you put it on, it plays in the playbook. It plays in the new wave of British heavy metal playbook. You've got your obligatory instrumental, you've got your ballad type, you've got your screams, you've got your change of direction in pace, you've got, in fact, one track, I thought I was listening to a Rare Maiden cover at one point, like a Maiden track in there. It's horror themed, so you're getting that, as I said, new wave British heavy metal was heavily horror themed connected, so you got tracks like Night of the Living Dead in there, that and Fear No Evil. They're all those sort of tracks, on which we'll talk about later, have that kind of horror theme. Even the movie, there's a track called The Hunger, which I originally thought was maybe about the movie Hunger. I had to check it to make it came out in '83, so possibly it might be, but lyrically it didn't sound like it. I can't find the lyrics to the tracks because there's nowhere to be found. I can find them, but I don't think it makes much of a difference for us to look into. I think let's just look into the sounds, the tones, and the directions and the concepts of the album. So if you look at the album cover, it's very much, again, right in that wheelhouse. They're all wearing leather. One's got the lead. Pinkins has got a red sort of PVC. It's all like chaps on wearing a red PVC. Looks like a cod piece, but it probably isn't. The studs and the macho poses and the long hair and the wristbands and all that kind of stuff that you expect from that era. The album also has its obligatory sexist. I've talked about this before, that I feel that one downside to the new wave of British heavy metal was that there was this kind of machismo thing. Even Maiden fell into it. This sort of terrible machismo thing where, Charlotte the Harlot and all that kind of thing, like classic, in Spinal Tap where he says, what's that called? And he goes, suck my love pump, that kind of thing. And Streetwalker it's called. Not so as bad as some tracks that Tigers produced. Certainly not as bad as that. in that kind of lyrical content, but certainly in that direction. It was like we better do one. We better have one on there that says, shocks people. Let's talk about prostitution. Well, Iron Maiden had Charlotte the Harlot and 22 Acacia Avenue. Maybe we should have one as well. Blah. You get the feeling when you put it on. If you are a jaded new wave of British heavy metal fan, you will find this a little bit tedious in some respects. But if you like me, just enjoy it for its musical content and for its not for its novelty, because I don't think it's a novelty album. It's a novelty. The band's a novelty at its time, but not a novelty album by any means. You will enjoy it. It has some brilliant moments in it. It's quite lo-fi. The production is, as you can imagine, on a shoestring. It was released originally with a EP or single that came with it, which is something that, again, a lot of bands were doing back then in the 70s. I mean, the Pistols did it with their first, with Nevermind the Bollocks, right? They did the same thing. They released a single with it and some early copies. This was released with a single EP that were 2 tracks. Here Comes the Wrecking Crew and Retribution. Retribution could not be any more Judas Priest if you tried. I love Here Comes the Wrecking Crew because it, I thought originally it was written about the Wrecking Crew, the famous 60s and 70s, very much sought after studio musicians. But no, it wasn't. I don't think it is. It's more about they're going to come and break things up, smash things up. It's 51 minutes long. It was on Auburn Records and then again on Hell's Headbangers. Most people have given it a high rating. You see mainly 4 and 5s out of 10s. You see 7 out of 10s. I think it's unfair. It is a much better album than that itself. I haven't got a copy of. Apparently, original copies are extremely hard to get hold of. They only released 2000 originally. There's been reissues since, of course. So, probably grab yourself. Grab yourself a copy somewhere if you really want it. Or it's on all streaming platforms. Although, apparently, according to resources, the remaster that came out in 2017, sorry, is a much better version. It's much harder. It's got a cleaner sound. They've sort of they've just cleaned it up in comparison to the original one. And one of the great quotes from Kerrang was, "You have to earn this one. This is an album to be earned," and I quite like that. It's an album to find. They ranked the third track, When Tears Run Red, from Love Lost yesterday, as number 2 as their greatest songs by African American artists, which I think is well up there. I don't know if I agree. I'd probably say from that album, for me, something like Fear No Evil, or even the opening track, Night of the Living Dead. But hey, we all have our own tastes, don't we? Right? It's it's not. There's not a lot more I can say really about this album. That apart from that, it's a brilliant moment in time that it captures the spirit of an early musical genre, a burgeoning musical medium. Yes, heavy metal been around since, Black Sabbath. Yes, we know early Black Sabbath. We know that. But the actual metal that we listen to today, the one that visually that we admire, enjoy, and consume, all, in my opinion, stems from the British scene. The early British scene, 1980 onwards. That sort of fall out from punk, into a punk adjacent, as people like to call it, the punk adjacent music of Iron Maiden, because Di'Anno's love for punk. Vocally, this album, Sicky jumps from sounding like Di'Anno and using the same phrasing and everything, almost identically, to the screams and wails of of Rob Halford. He doesn't quite get to the registers that Bruce would do. I don't think he goes anywhere near that, but he's mainly playing in around the Di'Anno and the Halford sound area. I could be wrong. When you listen to this, you might hear other things. That's what I hear. A lot of reviews say that it's has a quite frantic punk energy and a faint residue of hard funk, while acknowledging the status of the band of African American metal, and they say it praises their powerful sound of the album. I think it's also a very undervalued Rough Diamond. It is rough, but I love that. You know me. It's one of my cornerstones of my musical journey. I don't like really well polished, perfect albums. I will listen to them. I don't enjoy them. It's one of the reasons why, I keep saying this, but Def Leppard's Hysteria is one of the worst albums ever made for me. It's just awful. And other people absolutely love it, and I'm going to make people grind their teeth and wave their fists at me and shout at me down internet forums. But it's just too clean. It's too polished. It's too layered. It's too full of ballads. I mean, at the time, don't get me wrong, I loved it. I bought Rocket. I bought Animal. I bought them when they came out. I bought the album. I saw them live several times on that tour. Yes, brilliant at the time because that's where my head was. But now later in life, I find it turgid, plastic Americana, and it doesn't compete with brilliant albums like On Through the Night. It just doesn't, or Pyromania. It just doesn't. And I don't know. I mean, we're going off tangent here, but it does mean you can understand where I'm coming from. It's why bands like Black Death and their one album history is perfect. Yes, it's derivative. Yes, it is lo-fi, but who cares? We all have influences, don't we? You know what I mean, Steve Jones quite aptly said that the guitar part in one of the tracks on Nevermind the Bollocks was basically Highway Star. It was he just bastardized Deep Purple's Highway Star, right? So I think it was for Bodies, was it? No, it wasn't Bodies. Anyway, sidetrack. That I didn't write that note down, so my brain may have reimagined it. But I do remember that conversation. I just don't remember what track on the album he was talking about. So they also bastardized Ziggy Stardust and all that sort of stuff. And Syd Barrett stuff. Early Pink Floyd even. So every album and every band will have that. Marillion's first album was often considered a Genesis rip-off. There's pieces in Grendel that sound a lot like Supper's Ready. So it influences influence. Doesn't make this album or those albums bad, does it? Makes them just a key point in history. Anyway, enough for me. That's the band. That's the album. We'll come over the other side. We'll have a quick chat about each track, and then we'll see what you think. Hope that you enjoy this album. Maybe take a break here, listen to it, and then come back and we'll go through it together and see what you think. Anyway, bye for now. Enjoy the ads. Remember, if you don't want ads, Patreon at Heavy Metal. It's patron/heavymetal.com. It's patron/heavymetal.com. No, it's not. No, it's not, Tony. It's patron/heavymetaltones.com. What was I thinking? Who knows? I'm not going to edit that out. I don't care. Anyway, it's patreon/heavymetaltones.com for $2 a month. You can get ad-free episodes. I am a bit behind putting episodes up there because of the festive season. It has been absolutely packed. So, anyway, on we go, and see you on the other side. Bye for now. Welcome back, guys, to part 2 of Heavy Metal Tones. Look at the amazingly obscure but brilliant album Black Death by the band Black Death, America's first all African American, or the world's first all African American heavy metal band. What a brilliant and daring thing to do as musicians at that time. And the album itself, as I said in the first part, it's a little derivative. It's a little bit one-notey, as it's not really breaking boundaries. It's not. It would have been in America, of course it is, but musically it sounds like a new wave of British heavy metal album, and I think if that was what they were going for, they certainly hit that on the head. Original copies go for thousands of dollars. The reissue, though, is probably a better option because it has a better. It's been remastered, has a better sound to it, a lot cleaner. What you'll hear on streaming platforms will be the remastered. So I can't make any comment on the original ones because I haven't heard it. I don't own a copy. The last time I heard an original copy of that was my mate Crazy Melvin had a copy and we played it on his record deck. Well, that was over 30 years ago, and I'm not going to remember the sound quality there to what it is now. I'm just not. Anyway, let's open up. We have side 1. We open with Night of the Living Dead. Night of the Living Death, in fact. Sorry, not dead. A play on the words of Night of the Living Dead. It's a typically horror-themed new wave of British heavy metal song. Opens with some, fantastic atmospheric guitar that only lasts for a fraction of a time, but it draws you in to, exactly what you're going to get from this album when this track starts. The drums start to hit at a really fast rate. You get that straight into the guitar rhythm. There's no mucking around. Nice cymbal work on the drums. Just driving. Such a signature sound of that time. Straight into it. Let's not muck around. Here we go, boys. This is our album. This is what they're saying. Lyrically, it's a call to arms. Get your head back, get your heads banging, get your arms in the air. Annoy your parents. And at this point, when the scream comes in, it's Di'Anno. He uses his vocal nuances are so influenced by Paul Di'Anno. It's wonderful because since Di'Anno only really gave us 2 Maiden albums, it's nice to hear a sound influenced by him. I'm sure other bands have been influenced by his sound, but it's really great. Again, it is a little bit of new British heavy metal by numbers, but who cares? It's rocking. This is a great opening track. Again, one of my favourites on the album. And Siki is a very underrated guitarist. I think that when you listen to his guitar, it has this sort of punchy, angular, cold tone. It's almost like he stripped the blues out from it, which a lot of the new wave British heavy metal bands use, a lot of blues influence, and you can go back to my episode and listen to that one. There is in my catalogue. I do talk about that. It stripped the blues out. It's quite sharp. I don't know if that's because it's his the limitation to his playing, or he deliberately did it. Well, it's not there's moments on this album where some blues comes in, but it's not. It's quite angular, quite sharp. It doesn't hang around, right? It's 4 minutes 27. It's basically telling you to stand up and annoy your parents. It's a youth anthem in some respect, right? Then we move on to The Hunger. As I said before, I thought this was based around the movie. It wasn't until I re-listened to it again after again that I noticed I couldn't hear a lyric that mentions anything to do with vampires or David Bowie in that respect. It's quite a disjointed track, It sort of stops sharply, moves on. There's not a lot of flow in it. Certainly an interesting number, but vocally, it almost has this sort of Led Zeppelin-esque feel to it. In fact, that's exactly what I feel it sounds like now on retrospect. It sounds a lot like a dirty, grimy Led Zeppelin track with explicit lyrics about eating flesh and so on. I think it's it also, I think it's a track that's about the hunger for someone's body, if you know what I mean. I think it's quite a sexualized track. Again, I haven't got the lyrics, and I don't want to go diving through the internet to find them, because often when that's the case, they're not always correct. So if I, sad to say, that's one of my favorite things to do, but I can't get them for this album. But that's okay. You can listen to them yourself and work out what you think. Then we move into, as I said, what Kerrang consider the second best track made by an African American band. When Tears Run Red from Love Lost Yesterday. That's from Tears Run Red, open brackets, from Love Lost Yesterday, close brackets. One of the longest tracks on the album at 5:41, or third longest track. And it, for me, it's basically Remember Tomorrow. It's that, you know, when you listen to Remember Tomorrow, Di'Anno, when he sings that in that track for Maiden, there's a real sense of loneliness. I get a vision of steam coming off wet roads when the sun comes out, after it's been raining, you know, wet cobbled streets, small roads, council houses in London, you know, up north, mills up north. I get that's what I get from Remember Tomorrow. Even like the image of lakes with steam rising off them, you know, that's what you get when I hear that. And this has that same thing. It has that sort of open space in the sound. It's soulful. It is exactly what Remember Tomorrow is. If you know what I mean. It's exactly what this sounds like. So this is why when I heard this album again for the first time after many years, I thought, geez, is this Iron Maiden by numbers? Because that appears on track 3 in side 1. But I don't know. I think maybe it's just they love that track so much they wanted to create something similar. I mean, you be the judge. If you've listened to it, you know what I mean. Go and listen to Remember Tomorrow afterwards or before, and listen to this one and see what you think. You know, the use of atmosphere, the use of the high E on the bass playing through underneath that opening bit there, or it could be the bass and could be the low E on the guitar, but it sounds like a bass part to me. You know, slow, intricate, thought out cymbal work, hi-hats, and then of course the soulful wailings of the vocal line, and then speeding up to get faster and faster, and then going back slow again. It does. It just feels like they've listened to Remember Tomorrow and gone, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do a track like this because we love it, and you know, it's iconic. Yeah, maybe. Is it the second best? I don't know if I agree with that. I think that's a very big call, Kerrang. Oh, and off this album, I would have picked Fear No Evil, which is the next track, the last track on side 2. It's a blinder of a track. I love it so much. It's possibly my favorite on the album because they basically just recite the Lord's Prayer right at the beginning, the entire Lord's Prayer, and then they sing their song based around it, and I absolutely love that. It's right there in my wheelhouse, you know, sort of thing. This is a Venom-esque sound. It doesn't have the guttural blackness and the anger and the destructive noise that was which made Venom so amazing, but it has that sort of dark kind of feel. Very much sort of sound that, say, bands like Satan, Demon, Cloven Hoof even would have done at that time. It seems to be that there were tropes. There were definite tropes that bands sort of ticked the boxes for, which made the audience apparently like it. I think that the audience was a bit more sophisticated than it makes out to be sometimes, and I think they let some bands, and I'm not saying that Black Death did this, but some bands who go by numbers, let their audience down, because their audiences are a bit more sophisticated than you think. They will want something different. They don't always want the same. There's a few of them that do, but very few don't. You have to look at the punk movement in the UK. It's a classic example. Not one punk track was like another. They were all different sounds. They were doing different things. If you listen to Wire, for instance, or to Killing Joke, then you listen to 999, or go through to listen to, say, the Stranglers or the Pistols. That all sound different. Susie, all sound different. Speaking of which, once a month for this year now, I'm dropping down. I'm taking away the Metal Ruse. I may bring it back once in a while, but the Metal Ruse tapes are going to take on a hiatus. And we're going to do a monthly punk episode. The last episode of the month will be, so every 4 episodes will be a punk-focused episode. So you'll know, if you're big punk fans out there, wait for that. You're going to enjoy it. It will all be based around the UK punk scene from 76 onwards. So if that's your scene, please come along. You might learn some stuff. There might be some obscure stuff you've never heard of. I'm looking forward to talk about it. Anyway, back to the album. Ending of the track, Fear No Evil. 6 minutes 8, brilliant way to end side A. This one has everything, right? As I said, you've got that atmospheric opening where he's singing or speaking the Lord's Prayer over to a very like guitar piece. Then you've got the screams of Halford. He brings in some real high falsetto singing that also, honestly, King Diamond, a Merciful Fate. There's Merciful Fate in here as well, which I never really considered, but now thinking about it, there's Merciful Fate in there, right? It has the vocal nuance of Di'Anno, but it has the range that Di'Anno could never get. It's right up there. He must have had his balls in a vice to get this tone, this note. But it's an absolute cracker of a track. It changes direction. It's loud. It's dark. It's probably the heaviest track on the album. It's got some proto black metal guttural stuff in it that was still at that time on its way up, but in America it was so underground that I don't know whether the band would have heard it in the States particularly. It's very European. But yes, it does have a bit of King Diamond, which I never really thought of. A little bit of Rob Halford in there as well, but a fantastic track. The guitar parts, the drumming, the bass, it's all as expected. Nothing going to blow your mind, but it is such an interestingly diverse track to finish on. Again, one of my favourite numbers on the album. Then we flip the album over and we get Scream for the Iron Messiah. This is the shortest track on the album at 3 minutes 43. I actually I dig this as a first opening track because, like Night of the Living Death, it opens the side with a bit of pace and a bit of speed and a little bit of aggression. This one could almost be considered speed metal. It is at a hectic pace. I don't know how the band have kept up with anything. It's one of the fastest tracks of that era, in my opinion. I don't know. Again, this is all subjective. There will be faster, I'm sure. But for a first album, they're really mixing it up here. Yes, as I said earlier on the first part of the show, it is a bit new wave of British heavy metal by numbers, or NWOBHM by numbers. But there are moments in it that jump out, like parts of Fear No Evil, right? And parts like Scream of the Iron Messiah. You can see where they could be different, where they aren't playing in that. We are this band, and we need to sound like this band. There is a little bit of independence, a little bit of let's do something different here, and you get that with the Scream of the Iron Messiah. It's just like one continuous speed scream almost. Sicky is so diverse on this album. As you go through the album, you'll feel that you just end up seeing more things each time you listen to it. Then we move into Streetwalker, second longest track on the album, 6 minutes 30 seconds. As I said before, this is their misogyny moment. This is their Charlotte the Harlot, their 22 Acacia Avenue. They're moments where, you know, the boys will be boys kind of attitude that comes across in some. I'm not a fan. I mean, I love Charlotte Harlot and I love 22 Acacia Avenue musically, and I often look at them as they're probably the least offensive of the types of misogyny that was happening, and machismo that was happening at the time. But you know, it gave the medium a bad name. Let's be honest. Streetwalker, not my favorite on the album. You know, musically, nothing really outrageous. It's exactly what it was before. There's a little bit of, I mean, there's some great bass playing on it, and I like the drumming, but lyrically or conceptually, I think they could have left it off, to be honest. I will say it's quite chuggy, and it has a real sort of Thin Lizzy sort of driving sound to it, like chug 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 chug. It's some good jing jing jings, as or chug chug chug, as Steve Jones would say. You know, it's quite driving. It's got a little bit of a sort of Deep Purple-ish drive at the beginning. The lyric doesn't come into like 1.5 minutes in, so you get that really nice driving tone. Good track, but then it gets ruined by the lyrical concept of it. Anyway, still not a bad track. Because it's the second longest track on the album, it does overstay its welcome a little bit. But hey, we're going to get right. It happens. And then we end on the title track of the album, the instrumental piece, well, semi-instrumental. There's some vocal lines, you know, some vocal harmonies. Black Death. Now this is 9 minutes and 18 seconds long. This is their epic. This is their Maiden-style epic. And I really like it. I think that I would have had it further up in the album, probably second and finished with Streetwalker, although saying that, maybe not. I probably would have taken Streetwalker off, put Here Comes the Wrecking Crew, and then finish with Black Death, put Streetwalker on the single that come with it. But hey, we all have our own opinions, right? I mean, it's not purely instrumental. There is a lyrics in it, but they're quite Spartan, paced out between the album. The song, I mean, 9 minutes long. You probably get a minute of lyrics, and the rest is all instrumental. It is, it's a real epic. This is the sound that we make. This is who we are. And I actually admire this track a lot because it's heavy. It's really heavy. It's like, along with Fear No Evil, it's one of the heaviest tracks on the album. And it has that kind of, they're brave enough to leave lots of space between the vocal lines. As I said, there's not much vocals on it. There's big spaces where the band is let loose to breathe. And by doing so, shows the world that we can play more than just, one dimension of sound. It's quite textured. It's very dark. It's very inspiring as a track, actually. I love it. And again, I probably would have had it somewhere else in the mix. But finishing the album on this does make sense because you've got to the end. You want to end on an epic. A lot of Maiden albums end on epics, don't they? A lot of the new wave of British heavy metal albums end on epics, and I quite like the fact that it's not overburdened by lyrics and vocals. It's just Spartan right at the beginning and then sort of right at the end. It's pretty impressive, atmospheric. Again, I think this and Fear No Evil and Scream of the Iron Messiah are the reasons to buy this or listen to this album. I think the album is worth listening to anyway because it's a time in history where it was just an unusual moment in musical history, and I don't want to say a freak of musical history because that's unfair. I think this is a really heartfelt, well-made album that could have taken them, apart from some sad mishaps, could have taken them into a stellar world. Had they been playing in the UK, maybe they would be still around now. This was a sound that was not that big in America, not that well loved over there. We were moving into a more, they had, as I said before, a much more diverse radio sound, and this album is not radio friendly in any way. You could probably pull the singles off of it if you wanted to, but it wouldn't have made a dent anywhere near the top 100, I don't think. And then we come to the bonus EP that came with it. The reason I'm going to talk about this is because it is on most streaming platforms. Okay, so Here Comes the Wrecking Crew, 4 minutes and 24. Look, it's a sort of, if you think about the time that this was being made, you had your early hip hop, so Grandmaster Flash, African Bambaataa, Run DMC. There was a lot of electro. The rap scene then was all about. It wasn't about, and pardon my language, bitches and stitches and boats and hoes and attainment and all that horrible, horrible stuff that I absolutely abhor about it. That modern rap. It was. They had statements, things like white lines about, drug abuse. There were moments when, of course, it was like, we are the Wrecking Crew, like Run DM, like the Rocksteady Crew, things like that. Telling the people who they are and what a cult, that what family they're affiliated to, what youth culture they're affiliated to, and this sort of has that. It's saying, we are out there and we're going to smash things up, and we are the Wrecking Crew. Here we come. Take us as you get. It's sort of an oddity because it mixes everyday rock and roll and just rock AOR with heavy metal and a bit of like almost proto rap. It's not rap happening in it, but the concepts behind it. Motorhead did it, with tracks that sort of told the world we are who we are. They did it a fair bit, but this is slightly different. I feel very, very slightly different. And again, probably the second fastest track that's not on the album. In fact, it's the fastest track not on the album. And I probably would have again taken Streetwalker off and put on Here Comes the Wrecking Crew. Now, I suppose we all have our own nuances, don't we? But it's fast. There's lots of chaos. They're trying to put across to the listener that they are mad, full of energy, heavy, uncontrollable, you young men. And I really enjoy it. Retribution, which is the B-side of the EP, which is 5 minutes and 28, honestly, is another track that I would have put on the album, where you could, because I think this is actually a really unique sound. It's one of the tracks that when you go through, like, When Tears Run Red, sounds like Maiden. When you listen to Black Death, it sounds like a bit like Maiden. But when you get to Retribution, it seems to be that they've really found their sound. Yes, it has notes and nuances of Maiden and Priest and all those brilliant bands that they were influenced by. But it just has, I don't know, it just has a sound that I think would have sat better on the album again instead of Streetwalker even. Maybe Scream for I Am Messiah, Retribution, and then Black Death. Maybe. Who knows? I can see why they put it out as an EP to go with it, because they wanted to get those tracks out as well. But these two tracks, so Here Comes the Wrecking Crew and Retribution, are almost like we've made an album of our influences, now we're going to make an album of our sound. I could be wrong. I think that's what I'm hearing anyway. And I really like that. I like that they've gone, listen, this is what the kids want and this is what we want to do. Maybe even Black Death goes into that category, possibly. I mean, again, brilliant. I think one of the best not on the album. It's better than Here Comes the Wrecking Crew, but the Wrecking Crew is more interesting and more of a musical oddity, if that's the right term. The way that it's influences by slightly different things that the band is influenced by on the main album. It'd be interesting to know who wrote that track and Retribution, and to see if it was written by different people. Who knows? It might have been a different members of the band that wrote it, or it could be a collective. But either way, I think that the bonus EP is well worth a listen to. And if you've got a copy of it, lucky you. That's all I can say. Original anyway. I'd love to hear the original again. Really love to hear the original again, just to see how it compares to this. So, my summing up on this album is that it's a brilliant moment in time. Yes, it can be a little bit one-dimensional in its sound, that it sort of sounds of its time and influenced by its time. But then it has moments on it like Fear No Evil, like Black Death, like Scream of Iron Messiah, like Retribution, Here Comes the Wrecking Crew, that make it slightly different to everything else. And the fact that it's made by African Americans in Ohio, is in Cleveland, sorry, is just nuts, right? Absolutely nuts. You close your eyes, put this on your record deck, and you would not know. You would think it was made in East London or Bradford or somewhere like that, somewhere up north in the UK, in the UK scene, even maybe somewhere in Europe, but certainly not in America. And I think this is what makes this such an interestingly wonderful album to listen to. So please do go take a listen. It's on all streaming platforms. If you love it, on Bandcamp, I still you can buy copies of it from Hell's Headbangers. Certainly worth a listen to if you haven't listened to it already. It will go now into my Hall of Fame of interesting one-off albums by interesting bands, and it starts the year off well. I think starts it off with a little bit of underground, which is where I like to play. Coming up on the show, I've got an interview with the Death Metal Mum. She is a brilliant content producer, maker on TikTok and on Instagram. She's also works for record companies where she deals, and does PR, and she lives and breathes the extreme scene, and it's just interesting. Her story is really interesting, and I'm looking forward to you and me and her talking, and to you listening to it. Anyway, bye for now. Chat soon. Keep safe and have a happy new year. Bye bye.